Hi everyone, my name is Amy Parsons and this is my unit plan for project-based learning with a math fair project. A math fair is a community event that I developed with others at Westchester University back in the day as an undergrad. It's changed a lot since then, but basically a math fair can combine elements of a traditional science fair, a family social, an art show, an open house, and more. So we're looking to get students' work up, displayed, parents, teachers, families, members of the community all coming together. And then, of course, with everything in this new virtual situation, we're looking for how technology could really accentuate and add to the connections made at this type of event. A big part of a math fair was my middle schoolers displaying a math fair project. And so, whereas before that would be on a trifold board, what I tried to do in this unit plan is recreate that using new best practices as learned in this course for technology. So basically, students are finding a topic or a purpose question. They're using the scientific method along with their data to answer those questions. And this is where student choice is a really big part of that. These are just some sample purpose questions that students could use as inspiration, but really this project is as open-ended as it can be, where students can find something they're interested in, and as long as it can be answered mathematically, they could do that. So these are the major math standards that I would use with students. These are the application, real world, analyzing relationship, and then displaying your conclusions type of standards. And then, of course, the ISTE standards are listed with each of my lessons. The first lesson would be an introduction. Students are researching, what topics they want to do. And then the standard is that they are the ones designing the process and setting their learning goals. So this is where students are really, and they're not just coming out with the question, they have to think through that whole process. So what is my experiment going to look like? What kind of data am I going to need? How am I going to phrase this question? The technology is that students would post their question on a discussion board. We use Canvas, and this would work well there. They read and respond to others. And then finally, they start a Google Doc where the student and I can conference throughout the project. And this was one of the main improvements to the old way of doing things. So instead of just handing out a project and seeing it again at the end, the student and I would have this Google Doc to allow for conferencing and updates throughout the project. Lesson 2 is the lesson where students would design their experiment, identify those major parts using vocabulary. The technology is that students would not only be guided with search engines, but they would use a mind map to show their process. So one really cool resource that I found to do that was called, I'm not sure how you say this, Mind 'em Up. And this was a free site where students could kind of lay out their thinking. Maybe it was a web, maybe it was a hierarchy. There was a couple different formats. There is a video here if you're interested. Lesson 3 was where students were collecting their data. And that ties directly in with an ISTE standard, not only collecting the data, but using digital tools to analyze and represent it. So I found a cool thing here called Stick Pick, and this is the picture here, an app where you can preload questions, or at least the Bloom's taxonomy for your students, one by one or as a group. And so I could see this really being handy for preparing questions ahead of time, making sure my special education students are feeling supported, that I'm differentiating. And sometimes when you go to ask those, you want to ask a higher level question, and it's hard to think of those question stems on the spot. Next, students would be using Google Forms to organize and manipulate their data. I find my 6th graders don't have a ton of experience with forms, but it's a very powerful way for them to work with their numbers. There's a lot of extension here. I could see some of my students really getting into things like Google's Analytics Academy, and I would love to see them kind of take that and run with it. The 4th lesson out of 5 here, so 4 out of 5, students would be presenting what their data was, what they found, the answers to their questions, conclusions that they made. So this is where I tried to build in as much student choice as possible. So rather than just the traditional trifold board, Students could publish their materials using things like Prezi, Google Sites like we did, Flipster, all of these different programs. And in order to make sure that we're assessing everybody the same, I think a rubric would work well, to make sure that students are kind of considering their message, their audience, etc. Finally, in lesson 5, students would have reflection over what they've learned, and I think it's important to build that in. So students would not only reflect on what they've learned, but they would see what everybody else has been up to as well. So I think this is another part of the unit plan where technology can really enhance what's going on, because it's connecting students that may not have otherwise worked together. One cool program for this was called Synth, and you'll see that in a second. And Peer Grade, where students are given some structure or scaffolding for commenting on each other's work. It's not only anonymous, but I think sometimes you tell kids to sit next to each other and give each other feedback, and you're tempted to just say, oh yeah, this is great. And Peer Grade really breaks it down for them. This says 5 lessons, but again, this could be kind of sized up or down for as much or as little time as possible. This is Synth, which is kind of short podcasting bites. I think that's less scary to students because it's in small chunks of video recording. This is a screenshot of Peer Grade, as well as a little video if you're interested. And then finally, I think that the Triple E framework kind of sums up this whole project for me. So I'm really looking to build in student choice and project-based learning. I think, sometimes we don't have enough time for all the project-based learning we like to do. And I think this could be really refreshing for students at that point in the year after standardized testing, when the pressure's off and they could really be creative, and kind of feel like they're in charge. Enhancement, I think the technology here doesn't just take the place of or replace things because of our virtual COVID world. I think it improves it because it definitely widens the audience and it provides more opportunities for feedback. And then finally, extension. I think that this project allows students to select topics of interest. I think it's low floor, high ceiling, meaning any student can walk into this project, but then the sky's the limit. And hopefully they're picking something that really does become that 24/7 outside of the classroom connection. This was another graphic I found that I thought summed it up, as well as this one. And just a good reminder for myself of, what's the goal here? And the goal is to have students feel like they are in charge of, they have the ownership of their learning. These are some of the resources that I mentioned that are further listed on the Google site. And that's it. Thank you for your consideration and your feedback on my project.